They told me my mother was dead in 1988. I was young then. Young enough that adults thought I would forget. Young enough that no one bothered to explain what dead really meant. They used careful voices and short sentences, as if clarity itself might hurt me. "She's gone," my aunt said. It was sudden, someone else added. "You're safe now," my father kept repeating. Safe from what? I never understood. There was no body for me to see. No final moment to remember. Just a closed coffin at a small service where everyone cried except me. I stood there holding my father's hand, watching faces twist with grief I couldn't yet feel. I remember thinking my mother must be cold inside that box. I remember wanting to open it. I remember being told not to. After that, life moved forward in the way it always does when adults decide something is over. Her name stopped being said. Her photographs were packed away. Her clothes disappeared from the closet. It was as if she had never existed. I grew up around that absence. It shaped me quietly. Other kids had mothers who reminded them to eat, to sleep, to call. Mine was spoken of in past tense, like a story that had already ended. "She would have been proud of you," my father said sometimes. I believed him. I had no reason not to. Years passed. Then decades. I built a life that didn't include her. I learned how to be whole without answers. I learned how to stop asking questions that made people uncomfortable. 1988 became just a date. My mother became just a memory. Until yesterday. Yesterday, my phone vibrated while I was washing dishes. I almost ignored it. Unknown number. I rarely answer those. But the phone stopped vibrating and a notification appeared instead. New voicemail. That alone was strange. No one leaves voicemails anymore. I dried my hands, picked up the phone, and pressed play. At first, there was silence. Then breathing. And then a voice I hadn't heard in over 40 years said my name. Not incorrectly. Not carefully. The way only one person ever had. I dropped the phone. My knees gave out, and I had to sit on the kitchen floor to keep from falling. My heart wasn't racing. It felt frozen, like it had missed a step and didn't know how to catch up. Because voices don't come back from the dead. And yet, hers had. I didn't listen to the voicemail again right away. The phone lay on the floor beside me, screen dark, as if it had done something wrong. I sat there longer than I needed to, pressing my palm against the tiles, grounding myself in the cold. My first thought wasn't joy. It wasn't fear either. It was confusion so deep it felt physical. I told myself there had to be an explanation. A prank. A mistake. Someone with a similar voice. The mind reaches for anything reasonable when the impossible shows up uninvited. After a while, I picked the phone up and listened again. This time, I paid attention to the details. The slight pause before she spoke. The way she pronounced my name. The breath she took mid-sentence, as if steadying herself. "Please," the voice said. "If this is still your number, call me." No dramatic words. No explanation. Just that. I sat at the kitchen table and stared out the window while the message replayed in my head. My hands were shaking now. Not violently. Just enough to be noticeable. I was suddenly 8 years old again, sitting on the edge of my bed, listening for footsteps that never came. I didn't call back. Not yet. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I let myself react. Because once you dial a number like that, there's no pretending afterward. No returning to the version of life where your mother is safely, unquestionably dead. That night, I slept in short fragments. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again, not from the phone, but from memory. Reading to me. Calling me in for dinner. Singing quietly when she thought no one was listening. By morning, I knew something important. This wasn't just about whether she was alive. It was about everything I had been told since 1988, and whether any of it had ever been true. I made coffee and sat down with my laptop. I typed my mother's name into search engines that hadn't existed when she was declared dead. I checked old records, public notices, anything that might confirm or deny what my ears were insisting on. The official record still said the same thing it always had. Deceased. 1988. Cause: unresolved. Unresolved. I stared at that word for a long time. Then I realized something that made my chest tighten. If the record had never been resolved, then maybe my mother's story hadn't been either. I spent the rest of the morning moving slowly, as if any sudden motion might shatter whatever fragile balance I was holding together. I didn't go to work. I didn't answer messages. I let the world wait while I tried to catch up to it. Around noon, I finally did what I had been avoiding since the night before. I called my father. He answered on the third ring. "Hey," he said, the same way he always did. Familiar. Grounded. Real. For a moment, I almost hung up. Instead, I said, "Dad, do you remember the day they told us Mom died?" There was a pause. Not long. Just enough. "Of course," he replied. "Why?" "I need you to tell me what happened," I said. "Exactly. Not the short version. The real one." Another pause. Longer this time. "That was a long time ago," he said carefully. "Why bring it up now?" "Because she called me," I almost said. "Because she said my name." But I didn't. "Something's come up," I said instead. "And I can't make sense of it unless I understand what happened back then." He sighed. I heard him sit down, the sound of a chair shifting on the other end of the line. "They said there was an accident," he began. "She disappeared. They searched. They waited. Eventually, they declared her dead." "That's what everyone always says," I replied. "But no one ever says how." Silence. "Dad." "It was complicated," he said finally. "There were things going on." "What things?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter. "Your mother was afraid," he said. "Not of us. Of something else." I felt my stomach tighten. "Afraid of what?" He hesitated. "I don't know if it's my place to tell you." That sentence landed heavily. "My mother called me," I said. The line went completely still. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean I received a voicemail. Yesterday. From her." He didn't deny it. He didn't laugh. He didn't tell me it was impossible. He just said, "Oh." That single sound told me everything I needed to know. "You knew," I said quietly. He exhaled slowly. "I knew she might still be alive." Might. The word felt like a crack running through 40 years of certainty. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because," he said, his voice breaking just slightly, "I was told it was safer if you believed she was gone." Safer. That word again. I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair. "Safer for who?" I asked. "For you," he replied. "And for her." I ended the call shortly after that. Not in anger. In exhaustion. I sat there afterward, staring at nothing, realizing that the voicemail wasn't the first lie that had been broken. It was just the one that finally made the rest visible. I didn't cry after that call. I didn't shout either. I just sat there, very still, letting the word safer echo around in my head until it lost its meaning. People use that word when they don't want to say truth. Or danger. Or fear. It becomes a blanket you throw over something sharp so no one cuts themselves, even if it means no one can see what's underneath. I replayed my father's voice again and again. I knew she might still be alive. Might. That meant there had always been a space where my mother existed, not dead, not present, just suspended. And everyone around me had agreed to leave that space unexplored. Including him. I walked through my house like it belonged to someone else. I opened drawers I hadn't touched in years. Old files. Old envelopes. Things I had packed away because they belonged to a chapter that was supposedly finished. In a box at the back of a closet, I found photographs I hadn't seen since childhood. My mother holding me. My mother laughing. My mother looking directly at the camera with an expression I suddenly understood in a way I never had before. It wasn't joy. It was urgency. I wondered how many signs I had missed because I'd been told there was nothing left to look for. That afternoon, I listened to the voicemail again. This time, I noticed something new. At the very end, just before it cut off, there was a faint sound, like wind, or traffic, or maybe water moving nearby. She wasn't calling from a hospital bed. She wasn't calling from a place of rescue. She was somewhere, normal. That made it worse. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time, staring at the number. Every reason not to call ran through my mind. What if it wasn't really her? What if she hung up? What if she expected something I couldn't give? But beneath all of that was one simple truth. If I didn't call her back, I would be choosing the lie again. And I was tired of living inside things I hadn't chosen. I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, then stopped. For a moment, I thought she hadn't answered. Then I heard breathing. And then she said, softly, "I was hoping it was you." I couldn't speak. My throat closed around words I'd been storing for decades without knowing it. "It's me," I finally said. "I heard your message." She exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and restraint. "I wasn't sure you would," she said. I stared at the wall, tears finally blurring my vision. "I was told you were dead," I said. "I know," she replied. "I'm so sorry." That apology, quiet, controlled, hurt more than any explanation could have. Because it meant she had known all along what I believed. And she had lived with it anyway. We didn't say anything else for a moment. Not because there nothing to say, but because everything felt too heavy to place into words all at once. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Slow, careful, as if she had learned, over many years, how to stay quiet even when her heart wanted to speak. "Where are you?" I finally asked. She didn't answer directly. "Somewhere safe," she said. "I always have been." That word again. Safe. It followed my mother through time the way it had followed me through lies. "Why now?" I asked. "Why call me now, after all this time?" There was a pause. Longer than the others. "Because I didn't think I had much time left," she said. "And because I was told you were grown. That you had a life. That you could choose. Choose. No one had ever given me that before." She didn't tell her story all at once. She spoke in fragments, as if the past was something she had learned to handle in small pieces. She told me there were people she had been afraid of. Things she had seen. A situation that couldn't be fixed by staying. "I didn't disappear because I didn't love you," she said. "I disappeared because staying would have put you in danger." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to reject her at the same time. "Did you ever think about coming back?" I asked. "Every day," she replied. "But once the world thinks you're dead, staying that way becomes easier than returning." Easier. I closed my eyes. "Do you know what it's like," I said slowly, "to grow up believing your mother chose to leave this world instead of staying?" Her breath caught. "I know what it's like," she said, "to live every day knowing your child believes that." Neither of us cried. Not yet. We were still too busy standing at the edge of something that couldn't be undone. "I'm not calling to fix the past," she said carefully. "I'm calling to give you the truth. What you do with it, that's yours." That was the first thing she said that felt like respect. We didn't talk long after that. She said she didn't want to overwhelm me. She asked if she could call again. Not tomorrow. Not soon. Just, again. I don't know yet, I said honestly. I understand, she replied. When the call ended, I sat in silence, my phone warm in my hand. My mother was alive. And nothing about that truth felt simple. After the call ended, the house felt too quiet. Not peaceful, hollow. As if the walls had absorbed something they didn't know how to hold. I set the phone down carefully, like it might break if I wasn't gentle with it, and sat there staring at my hands. They were steady. That surprised me. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways over the years without realizing it. I had imagined grief, anger, collapse. Instead, what I felt was a deep, unsettling awareness, the kind that forces you to accept that your life has split into another before and after. My mother was alive, but the mother I knew was still gone. That distinction mattered more than I expected. I thought about the woman on the phone. Her controlled voice. The way she avoided details. The way she spoke like someone who had learned how to survive by staying just out of reach. She wasn't calling to reclaim motherhood. She wasn't asking to step back into my life. She was offering truth, and then stepping back again. I didn't know whether to be grateful or angry. That night, memories came back in sharp, unexpected flashes. The smell of her perfume. The sound of her footsteps in the hallway. The way she used to tuck the blanket under my chin and pause there, just for a second longer than necessary. Those memories had lived safely in the past when she was dead. Now they felt active. I wondered what she had done all these years. Where she had lived. Whether she had watched from a distance. Whether she had ever picked up the phone before and hung up again. The thought of that made my chest ache. I slept little. When I did, my dreams were disjointed. Conversations without words. Doors opening and closing. A voice calling my name from somewhere I couldn't reach. In the morning, I woke up knowing one thing for certain. Silence was no longer an option. Not the silence that had shaped my childhood. Not the silence that had protected everyone except me. If my mother had chosen to speak now, after all this time, then I had to choose how I would listen. And that choice felt heavier than any lie I had been told. I didn't tell anyone the next day. Not my father. Not my partner. Not even myself, out loud. I moved through the hours quietly, like someone carrying a fragile object they weren't ready to set down yet. I went to work. I answered questions. I nodded at the right moments. No one noticed the difference, and that made everything feel stranger. At lunch, I caught myself watching other people talk on their phones, laughing, arguing, living inside ordinary conversations with their parents. I wondered how many of them would still sound the same if 40 years of silence suddenly collapsed into a single voicemail. That evening, my father called again. I let it ring. I wasn't punishing him. I just didn't know how to hold his voice and hers in the same space yet. They belonged to different versions of my life, and I wasn't ready to let them collide. Instead, I opened a notebook and started writing things down. Not questions. Not accusations. Just facts. Declared dead. No body. Unresolved cause. Safer. Seeing it all on paper made the shape of it clearer. This hadn't been one decision. It had been a chain of them. People choosing the path of least disruption again and again, until the lie became a structure everyone lived inside. Including me. I listened to the voicemail one more time. This time, I didn't focus on the shock. I focused on her tone. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't dramatic. It was careful, like someone who had learned how much damage the wrong word could do. That told me something important. She wasn't calling to rewrite history. She was calling to stop carrying it alone. Late that night, I finally called my father back. I spoke to her, I said as soon as he answered. He didn't ask how. He didn't ask when. I figured you would, he said quietly. Why didn't you ever tell me the truth? I asked. Not angrily, just plainly. He exhaled slowly. Because once you tell a child their mother is alive but unreachable, you give them a different kind of grief. One that never closes. And telling me she was dead didn't. I asked. Silence. I thought I was protecting you, he said at last. I see now that I was deciding for you. That admission mattered. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this, I said. You don't have to do anything yet, he replied. Just don't let it eat you alive. After the call, I sat in the dark living room, realizing something I hadn't expected. For the first time since childhood, the story of my mother was no longer frozen. It was moving again. And movement, even when it's painful, means there's still life in the truth. Movement brings uncertainty with it. Once something starts moving again, you can't predict where it will stop, and that frightened me more than the silence ever had. Silence, at least, had boundaries. This didn't. 2 days passed before she called again. I saw the number this time. Same one. My chest tightened, but I answered. Hello, I said. I wasn't sure if I should, she began. I didn't want to intrude. The word intrude felt strange coming from my mother. But I understood why she used it. She had spent decades making herself small in my life. Careful. Optional. It's okay, I said. You can talk. She sounded relieved, but still restrained. She asked about my life in broad strokes. Work. Where I lived. Whether I was healthy. She didn't ask about my childhood. She didn't ask what it had been like without her. That absence spoke loudly. I want you to know, she said, I never stopped being your mother. I just stopped being visible. I didn't know how to respond to that. Visibility is not a small thing. It's presence. It's proof. And she had chosen not to give it. I'm not asking to come back, she added quickly. I'm not asking to meet. I just wanted you to hear my voice while I still could. Still could. That phrase settled heavily in my chest. Are you sick? I asked. She hesitated. Not in a way that needs explaining, she said gently. Just aware of time. We talked for a little while longer. Carefully. As if both of us were afraid that saying too much might collapse the fragile space we were standing in. After we hung up, I realized something important. This wasn't a reunion story. It wasn't a mystery being solved. It was a reckoning. With the past. With choices made under fear. With the cost of protection that turns into erasure. That night, I sat alone and asked myself the hardest question yet. What did I want from her? Not what she wanted. Not what anyone else expected. What I wanted. And the honest answer surprised me. I didn't want explanations. I didn't want apologies. And I didn't want to rebuild a relationship that had ended before it could form. What I wanted was something simpler. I wanted the truth to exist, out loud, acknowledged, no longer hidden behind dates and certificates and careful lies. I wanted my mother to be real again. Not as a parent. Not as a presence. But as a truth. And once I understood that, the path forward became clearer, not easier, but clearer. Once I admitted that to myself, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But the tension I had been carrying, the pressure to decide something, eased. I stopped feeling like I owed anyone a performance of forgiveness or reunion. This wasn't a story that needed to be wrapped neatly for other people to understand. It was mine. I called her a few days later, not because I had planned to, but because I found myself thinking about her voice again. Not the shock of hearing it, just the sound itself. Familiar in a way that didn't demand anything from me. She answered. Quickly. I'm glad you called, she said. We spoke differently this time. Less carefully. Still gently, but without the constant fear of saying the wrong thing. I asked her small questions. Where she lived now. What her days looked like. Whether she liked the place. She answered simply. No dramatic backstory. No dangerous names. No movie-style explanations. Just a woman who had learned how to live quietly, carrying a decision she had never stopped paying for. I used to imagine you, she said at one point. Not your face, just your life. I hoped it was ordinary. That you weren't shaped by what I did. I thought about that for a moment. I was shaped by it, I said honestly. But not ruined. She exhaled slowly. That matters more than you know. After that call, I didn't feel lighter. But I felt steadier. Like I had finally placed something heavy on a shelf instead of holding it in my arms. I told my father that evening that I had spoken to her again. He listened without interrupting. She sounds like herself, he said quietly. In the ways that count. I realized then that none of us were looking for absolution. We were looking for acknowledgement. That what happened had been real. That the cost had been real. That the silence had shaped all of us. And now, finally, that silence had been broken, not violently, not loudly, but enough. For the first time since yesterday's voicemail, I didn't feel like my life was unraveling. It felt like it was rearranging itself into something more honest. Honesty has a way of changing the air around you. Once the truth was no longer hidden, it stopped feeling dangerous. It didn't become easy, but it became manageable, something I could carry without constantly bracing myself. I noticed it in small ways. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. I stopped imagining worst-case endings. I let days pass without needing them to lead somewhere specific. My mother and I spoke occasionally after that. Not on a schedule. Not with expectations. Just when one of us felt ready. Some calls were short. Some were quiet. None of them tried to make up for the years we had lost. And strangely, that restraint made them bearable. She never asked me to visit. Never suggested we meet. She understood something important, that presence, after so long, can feel invasive if it isn't invited. I don't want to replace anything in your life, she told me once. I just didn't want to stay erased. That sentence stayed with me. Because erasure had been the real violence. Not her leaving. Not the lie itself. But the way her existence had been reduced to a date and a closed file. As days turned into weeks, I felt less like someone reacting and more like someone choosing. Choosing when to engage. Choosing when to step back. Choosing how much space this truth would occupy in my life. I realized I wasn't trying to get my mother back. I was reclaiming my own history. Knowing she was alive didn't rewrite my childhood. It didn't undo the loneliness or the questions I'd learned not to ask. But it did something quieter. It gave my past a voice. Not one that explained everything, just one that confirmed that what I'd felt all those years hadn't been imagined. The absence had been real. The silence had been intentional. And my confusion had been justified. That validation mattered more than answers ever could. For the first time since the voicemail, I felt grounded enough to look forward without fear of what might resurface behind me. The past had finally stopped whispering. It had spoken. And now, it was letting me go. Letting go didn't feel like release at first. It felt like learning how to hold something differently. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes. I stopped bracing myself for another message that might undo the calm I was starting to feel. The truth had found its place, and it wasn't asking to be center stage anymore. One afternoon, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I went back to the place where the service had been held in 1988. Not because I needed proof, but because I needed context. The building looked smaller than I remembered. The steps worn. The doors heavier. I stood there for a moment, remembering how I had been lifted up so I could see over the crowd, how adults' voices had sounded low and careful around me. I realized something then. That day had never been about death. It had been about certainty. Everyone around me had needed the story to end so life could continue. Declaring my mother dead had closed a door that felt too dangerous to leave open. Standing there now, decades later, I felt no anger toward that choice. Only a quiet understanding of how fear makes people crave finality. When I left, I didn't feel like I was walking away from my mother again. I felt like I was walking away from the version of the story that had kept me small. That evening, she called. "I didn't want to interrupt your day," she said, as she always did. "You're not," I replied. And for the first time, I meant it without hesitation. We talked about nothing important. A book she was reading. A memory of a place I'd never been. The weather. Ordinary things that didn't carry the weight of history. Before we hung up, she said, "Thank you for letting me exist again." I sat with that sentence for a long time after the call ended. Existence doesn't require forgiveness. It requires acknowledgement. And that, finally, had happened. Acknowledgement changed the way the truth sat inside me. It no longer felt like a secret pressing outward, demanding attention. It felt like something placed gently on the table between us, visible, real, and no longer dangerous to touch. I noticed how differently I carried myself after that. Lighter, in some ways. Not because the past had softened, but because it no longer followed me like a shadow I couldn't turn toward. I told a close friend about my mother for the first time. Not the version from 1988, the new one. The living one. I expected disbelief, questions, maybe even concern. Instead, she listened quietly and said, "That explains a lot about how you love." That surprised me. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You've always loved carefully," she said. "Like you learned early that people can disappear." I thought about that for a long time afterward. Maybe the truth hadn't just been waiting to be revealed. Maybe it had been shaping me all along, even in silence. My mother and I spoke less frequently after that, but with more ease. There was no urgency anymore. No sense that time was running out. Just two people acknowledging a connection that existed, without trying to force it into a shape it could never fully take. I didn't ask to meet her. She didn't offer. And strangely, that mutual restraint felt like respect. I understood now that some reunions aren't about proximity. They're about recognition. About knowing that someone is real, and that their story intersects with yours, even if it doesn't rejoin it. One evening, while sorting through old things, I found a small object I hadn't seen in years. A bracelet she had given me when I was very young. I had kept it without knowing why. I held it in my hand and felt something settle. She had been gone. She had been alive. Both things were true. And I had survived both versions of that truth. For the first time, I felt ready to let the story rest, not because it was finished, but because it no longer needed to be carried every day. Resting a story doesn't mean forgetting it. It means trusting that it won't disappear just because you stop holding it so tightly. I began to notice how often I used to define myself by what was missing. A mother who died too early. Answers that never came. A silence that shaped my caution. Now, those definitions felt incomplete. Not wrong, just incomplete. My mother remained present in my life in a way that felt strangely appropriate. Not as a daily voice. Not as a guide. But as a known truth. A living fact that no longer required explanation. Sometimes she would leave a short message. Sometimes weeks would pass without contact. Each time, I noticed how little anxiety accompanied it now. The fear of disappearance had loosened its grip. I wasn't waiting anymore. I realized that the most painful part of the lie hadn't been believing she was dead. It had been believing the story was closed. Closure had been forced on me before I was old enough to question it. And now, having the chance to reopen it, even briefly, had given me something far more valuable than answers. Choice. I chose when to listen. I chose when to speak. I chose how much space this truth would take. One afternoon, my father and I sat together without talking about the past at all. We watched the light shift across the room. He reached for his coffee, then paused. "I should have trusted you with the truth sooner," he said quietly. I didn't rush to respond. "I know," I said. "But I'm okay." He nodded. Not relieved, just present. That moment felt important. Not because it erased what had happened, but because it acknowledged it without letting it define us. As the days passed, I felt something settle that I hadn't realized was missing. A sense that my life wasn't fractured. It was layered. And layers, I was learning, don't weaken a story. They deepen it. Depth changes how you measure time. I stopped thinking in terms of what had been lost and started noticing what had quietly endured. My routines returned to me without effort. Mornings felt normal again. Evenings came without the old sense of waiting for something unfinished to interrupt them. The truth had found its place. I didn't mark the date my mother called. I didn't turn it into an anniversary. I let it remain what it was, a moment that reopened a door long enough for light to pass through, then closed gently without locking. We spoke less often now. When we did, the conversations were simple. She asked how my day was. I asked how she was feeling. We didn't chase intimacy. We respected distance. It felt honest. One day, she said something that surprised me. "I'm glad you didn't try to make me explain everything." I thought about that before answering. Some explanations, I said, turn into another kind of burden. She agreed. And I realized we had reached an understanding that didn't require agreement or forgiveness, just acceptance of limits. I also noticed how my body responded differently to the word mother now. It no longer tightened or drifted. It settled. The word had expanded to hold complexity without collapsing under it. There are people who believe truth must arrive loudly to be meaningful, that it has to upend lives to matter. But what I learned was quieter. Truth doesn't need spectacle. It needs space. Space to be acknowledged. Space to be felt. Space to be carried without becoming the whole load. I had been given that space at last. And in it, I felt something like peace, not the kind that forgets, but the kind that remembers without pain. Peace didn't arrive as a feeling. It arrived as an absence. The absence of urgency. The absence of rehearsed conversations. The absence of that quiet tension that had lived in my chest for as long as I could remember. I hadn't realized how much energy it took to live with a sealed story until the seal was broken. I moved through my days more gently now. Not carefully, gently. There's a difference. Careful living is built on fear. Gentle living is built on trust. I trusted myself. I trusted that I could hold difficult truths without being undone by them. I trusted that I didn't need to resolve every loose end for my life to feel complete. My mother remained a voice in the background of my life. Not a shadow. Not a ghost. Just a presence that existed without demanding explanation. Some days I thought of her. Some days I didn't. And when I didn't feel guilty. That, more than anything, told me I was healing. One evening, I sat alone and thought about the child I had been in 1988, standing beside a coffin that didn't contain what it claimed to, surrounded by adults who believed silence was kindness. I felt compassion for that child. Not pity. Not sorrow. Just compassion. They had survived something confusing without language for it. They had learned how to adapt, how to accept, how to move forward even when the story didn't make sense. That strength hadn't come from answers. It had come from endurance. I realized then that the voicemail hadn't rewritten my life. It had simply revealed a truth that had been shaping me quietly all along. And knowing that made me feel whole in a way I hadn't expected. Wholeness doesn't announce itself. You notice it later, when you realize you're no longer checking for cracks. I began trusting ordinary days again. The kind that don't carry revelations or phone calls or decisions that change the shape of your life. Days that ask nothing from you except to be lived. I didn't think about 1988 every day anymore. When I did, it no longer felt like a wound. It felt like context. Something that explained me without trapping me. My mother called less often now. When she did, her voice sounded steadier. Lighter, even. As if being acknowledged had lifted a weight she had carried alone for decades. "I don't feel like I'm hiding anymore," she said once. I understood that. Hiding changes a person. So does being found, even quietly. I never asked her where she lived exactly. I never asked for details that would pull her life too close to mine. Not because I was afraid, but because I had learned something important. Proximity does not equal healing. Sometimes, distance is what allows truth to breathe. My father and I found our own rhythm again too. We didn't need to rehash the past. It was there, acknowledged, no longer pretending to be something else. That honesty made our conversations easier, not harder. One afternoon, he said, "I always worried the truth would take something from you." I thought about that. "It gave me something," I replied. "Just not what anyone expected. It gave me choice. It gave me clarity. It gave me permission to live without a sealed ending." I realized then that the story of my mother hadn't been about death or disappearance. It had been about fear. And now that fear no longer ran the narrative. When fear stepped out of the story, everything else found its place. I stopped needing to explain myself to anyone. Not why I felt calm. Not why I wasn't chasing a reunion. Not why the truth, once revealed, hadn't turned my life upside down the way people expect these things to. Some stories don't explode. They settle. I realized that what mattered most to me was not what had happened in 1988, but what had happened after yesterday's voicemail. The way I had been given something rare, the chance to meet truth as an adult, with agency, with boundaries, with the ability to decide what it meant. As a child, I had been handed a conclusion without consent. As an adult, I was handed context and choice. That difference changed everything. My mother and I spoke one last time in a way that felt complete. Not final, but whole. She didn't ask for anything. I didn't promise anything. We acknowledged each other, and then we let the conversation end naturally. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. Not as a parent reclaiming a role. Not as a ghost returning to life. Just as a person who knew me, and had always known who I was. After that, days passed without contact. And they were fine. Good, even. I carried her existence with me the same way I carry other truths now, without tension, without urgency, without fear that it might disappear if I stop looking at it. I had learned something essential through all of this. Closure is not the same as erasure. And truth does not always arrive to demand action. Sometimes, it arrives simply to be known. And once it is known, truly known, it can rest. So can you.